want to welcome everybody to our second Zoom meeting. This for posterity's sake is being recorded, and it is so this is our May 2020 meeting. It's you know, the thing about this meeting is I'm glad we can meet this way, but I still miss, and I'm sure all of us do, we miss that personal touch where we sit down and talk face to face. I know I miss it a lot still. Hopefully we'll get back together soon. Although at my age, you know, and my religion, I'm very, very devout coward. And the thought of getting out and getting this disease is very frightening. So I'm going to stay locked in here for a while longer, I'm sure. Right now, I want to go to Cheryl. And Cheryl, Cheryl's going to talk about straitjackets very quickly. All right.
Okay. One thing I'd like to comment on is when we hear from readers, yes, readers and writers, it helps us know that we're going in a direction that the group wants to go in. We've had a couple responses that were very rewarding, but we don't have to only hear the positives. If somebody wants to give us a comment of how to improve, they can send it through the Straitjackets email. And in general, for me, as one of the editors, I'm curious whether the writers are enjoying some of the photos that we're putting up with their work. I was going back and reviewing some of the magazines, and some of the photos just cracked me up. But I'm the editor with the other group, and we find them funny, but we don't know whether the writers themselves find them funny. So any kind of little words like that just lets us know kind of taste and stuff like that. Also, we're opening up for, we've got a couple submissions so far for the summer. And that will be coming, the summer issue will be coming out sometime in July, I'm guessing, maybe toward the end, because our spring was kind of late. But so just send us stuff in.
Okay, I have a question for you. It is straitjackets.org, is that correct?
Yes, yes.
All right, I have put that in the chat room so for everyone to look at. So if you want to see, if you're unfamiliar with Straitjackets, it's our organization's magazine. They do a great job with it, and it's so a lot of people getting published there, and some terrific stories, poetry, essays, everything. Straitjackets.org, and it's spelled S-T-R-A-I-T jackets.org, one word. Straitjackets, one word. But you can find it at that location on the internet. Okay, Cheryl, any last words, any other words, or is that it?
That's it for me. I don't know. I can't even see Ellen, but I don't know if she wants to put something in here, or Judy. Oh, Ellen, there you are. Okay.
Okay.
Judy,
unmuting Ellen. Okay, Ellen, how about it? Do you have anything else?
Hi, everyone. Just that we take such joy in putting this magazine together and reading everyone's work. And we're just so impressed with the quality of the work that comes from our members. We do offer editing services. So if we think something might be just a little bit better, we will Cheryl contacts the author, and with their approval, we make the edits. But it's just been a delight in putting it together. And the team works so well together. Judy Mare and Jolynn Buring and Cheryl and moi. Anyway, thank you to all of you who submit, and to those of you who have been maybe a little reluctant, please just jump in. It's really a treat to, and it's great when you see your work published. So we'd like to hear from everybody.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to say this about straitjackets. For those of you who've never been published, getting credits is sometimes very important, and especially if you're looking for a publisher or to publish in the traditional way or looking for an agent. I think these are this is a good way to start. And the magazine is in terms of what they're looking for is pretty eclectic. And about the only thing that they don't want is articles or essays that deal with religion or politics. We try to keep away from people going to each other's throats and so forth. And so that's always a big help. All right. Well, the next on our list today is Sandy. And Sandy, as all of you know, is our tips on writing expert. Sandy, are you there?
I am here.
Aha.
And it's one of your favorites, Jim, Flashback. Jim told me that Elmore Leonard says don't. And I've also read that Sinclair Lewis says don't. However, and they say that because it interrupts the present unfolding events of your front story. But I think flashback in literature is time travel done right. And it is a device that allows readers to better understand the present day situation. It inserts context. And I made a list of a few flashback books. Norman Mailer used it in The Naked and the Dead. And maybe it was successful there because he went back in time for each of the soldiers, talked about their sex lives. So that might have been more intriguing. But Joseph Conrad in The Heart of Darkness, William Stryan's Sophie's Choice, and another favorite of Jim's, F. Scott Fitzgerald, used it in The Great Gatsby. J.K. Rowling in Harry Potter, Mary Shelley in Frankenstein, Anna Quindlen's Blessings, and all the Sue Grafton alphabet mysteries. So they have been used, excuse me, terrible frog this morning, have used it successfully and done it well. Flashbacks usually fail because they are poorly designed, they're overly long, or they're awkwardly constructed. So obviously, if you're going to use flashback, you want to make it the very best writing and have a purpose. Now, some of the reasons for using flashbacks include it aids in character development. You can convey background information that supports the main storyline. It also can provide insight into the main character's motivations for the decisions they make. So, excuse me some more. Flashbacks also can incorporate different time periods, and everyone has, including our characters, have layers of moments in their lives that influence who they are in the present. Or if a story has a main secret, mystery, or revelation, a flashback can be used to prolong the outcome and milk the suspense. Flashbacks also make readers more connected to characters because they provide, I'm sorry, deeper insight. And flashbacks also can explain the current conflict. It can help a reader better understand the why and how the protagonist got into the situation that's driving the plot. And typically readers are intrigued to know some of the past and influences that have shaped the characters. Flashbacks can be recollections, which are the simplest and least intrusive. It's a few sentences or several paragraphs that offer a brief window into the past, granting readers just a glimpse and then slams the door shut on that. Frame story creates a story within a story. And that's like Frankenstein and Sophie's Choice. There are a couple more, but what they do is they start in the present, and there is the entire book is almost a flashback, and they usually have a prologue and an epilogue. A flashback scene is comprised of either a single scene or several scenes, and sometimes an entire chapter. Flashbacks are, and there are dreams also is another format. Barbara Kingsolver did a good job in Animal Dreams. Flashbacks, however, are designed for the reader's education. So if your flashback is not going to elucidate, illuminate, or provide context, you probably don't need it.
All right, thank you, Sandy. I would like to point out two interesting flashbacks. One, one of my favorite nonfiction books of all time, In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. It saves the climax of the book for a flashback. It's a flashback at the end. And it makes plenty of sense why he saves it for that. That's one. The other is a movie. If you've never seen it, it shows up every once in a while on American Movie Classics, AMC, is one called The Locket with Robert Mitchum and I've forgotten Lorraine Day and all. It starts and then has a flashback. Then it has a flashback within the flashback and a flashback within the flashback. And then it works, it does about four of them, and then it works its way back up. It's one of the most interestingly complex movies I've ever seen, American films. And it's fascinating. I don't think it's a good movie, but it's certainly fascinating to see about flashbacks. Well, thank you very much, Sandy. It's a great one. Let's see. The next thing I'd like to go to is, this is a hand-raising exercise for anybody who has had something either recently published, you've completed something, some aspect of writing that you would like to share with the rest of us. But I'm going to start today with my wife and let her, just for those of you who don't know, this is my wife, Vicki. And Vicki has, tell them, babe.
I was a finalist in Memoir's first novel in the Next Generation Indie Book Awards. So that was pretty exciting because I had no expectations that would happen.
She gets a medal and everything, so it's wonderful. Yes, it's terrific. For me, I will say one quick thing. For the first time, I have a work on Audible. I just got clearance this week. It's called Like an Earthquake, a short story. And I did the narration myself. So that's there. Is there anyone else who would like to, who has something that they would like to talk about?
Judy,
Judy,
does she have her hand up?
Judy, your hand is up. Is that?
Didn't do that.
Oh, you
Okay.
didn't do
I'm
that.
putting it down.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right. You're muted again. All right. Anybody else have anything that you would like to talk about? No, not really, huh?
Wait,
Karen's
Karen's got her hand
there
up.
we come. Okay. Kathleen, we're going to start with you.
Well, I want to thank Michelle for inviting me to this, number one, because this is really cool. I'm in Arizona, but I finished 2 drafts of 2 different novels and working with an editor on that. And I just started writing in December. So I think those are just huge milestones. And Michelle's been a great support. I'm working on my first submission for a short story because I'd never written a short story before. And she helped me with some editing. So I just want to thank you as a group and as individuals for doing this and helping somebody who's a brand new writer.
Oh, well, thank you and congratulations and good luck with your writing career. All right, Cheryl, if I can unmute you here. Okay, you're on.
I just wanted you to repeat what you have coming out on Audible. What was the title?
It's called Like an Earthquake,
Okay,
a short story. And if you put it in that way, you'll find it.
okay.
I have it. It's also on Kindle as a short story, and then Audible. This was an experiment on my part as much as anything. And I don't know if you remember, but I think it was year before last, Lynn did a presentation on doing Audible books, recorded books. And once she did that, I've been intrigued by it ever since. And so I put together a little studio here in my room, and it works well because you see all the books in the back. They act as a nice kind of a sound room, and the sound was pretty good. And yeah, so it's on Audible.
Good, thank you.
Uh-huh. All right. Anybody else have anything you would like to brag about? No? All right. Well, in that case, wait. Oh, yes. Go ahead. Let me unmute you. Where are you?
Came in later though.
Are you?
Oh, there you are.
Are you
Yeah.
talking?
Okay, you're free. You're
I'm like Cheryl. I just wanted to know just a tad more about your experience doing that Audible.
Well, you have to be approved.
okay. Well, there's a couple of programs that you can use. I used one. I think I did. I'm on a Mac, so I used GarageBand, I think it was, and you can do it as a either as a narration or music and whatever. It's a program you have to learn a little bit. It takes a little bit of learning, but you have to go to the I think it's ACX. And if you go there, they will tell you what the parameters are, the technical parameters are, and you can put those into your program. And then actually, I screwed up the first time. They didn't accept it, and it wasn't because it was badly the audio was bad. It was that my parameters didn't fit, so I had to go back. I didn't have to do it all over again. I just had to put the parameters in correctly. Did just fine, and next thing I know, I am, I'm there. So and it's not very long. I have a setup here. As you can see, if I put this around, I have my microphone and everything right here. It's not an easy process, because if you screw up in just one word, one syllable, you have to redo the whole sentence. Then you have to go back, and once you get it done, you have to cut out and paste together and everything. It was really fun. Would I do a whole novel that way? Well, I don't know. I might try. I might. But it is time consuming. I probably spent, putting that together, it's about 22 minutes long, 22 minutes long. I probably spent about maybe 8 hours putting it together. Now figure the whole book done that way, I may be talking about 100 hours.
Or more.
Or more, yes, that's right, Karen. Or
I
more.
was just curious. It doesn't sound like a project I'd want to get involved in.
Yeah. I enjoyed doing it, and I'm not sure I'll do it again. I think it turned out really well.
Is there a place for us to leave reviews for you if we listen?
Yes, there is. Yeah,
Okay.
you can leave reviews. Please do.
That'd be
good.
Thank you.
Oh, all right. Let's see. Anybody else have any questions or anything?
Where's Howard?
No.
No.
Ellen has her hand up.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah.
And I'm going to unmute Ellen. All right, Ellen.
Ah, thank you. Great. Well, after 7 long years of writing and editing and re-editing and re-editing and re-editing and moments of panic, I'm in the process of uploading my memoir, Grateful for the Colored Blue, onto Ingram Spark and Amazon. And I'm waiting for, yay, I'm waiting for one more comment that's coming Monday. And after that, it looks like it's going to be a book. So I'm pretty excited and very nervous about that.
Well, I just want to add that for those of you who don't know, Ellen read it in our group, and not only was it a really moving experience, every time she had us near tears or in tears, and it's a very moving memoir. And so if you've not if you get a chance to pick it up, I think you should. I think everybody will find it extremely valuable. Dan, you had one. Dan, are you there? Let me unmute you. I thought I unmuted you there. Unmute. He's not unmuting. Okay, Dan, you're free. Are you there, Dan? Dan, your hand's up. You're not muted, Dan.
Okay.
No Dan. Okay.
Onward.
Onward. All right. At this spot, it's time that we move on to, I'm going to call Michelle again. And Michelle is going to give us an introduction to Jonathan Maberry, our speaker today. All right. And
again. I think I'm on.
there you are again. Yes, you're on again.
Okay, great. So I'll just give a short bio. When you're introducing a guest speaker like Jonathan, you could take 20 minutes just introducing all of his past accomplishments and awards. So I'm not going to do that. However, I'm going to read the bio that he gave us. So Jonathan is a New York Times best-selling author, 5-time Bram Stoker Award winner, and a comic book writer. His vampire apocalypse book series, V-Wars, was a Netflix original series. And by the way, if you have not seen it yet, definitely hunt it down on Netflix and watch it. It's a fabulous, fabulous show. It was #1 globally, and they're looking at trying to get it back on for a second season, I hear. He writes in multiple genres, including suspense, thriller, horror, science fiction, fantasy, and action for adults, teens, and middle grade. He's the editor of many anthologies, including The X-Files, Aliens, Bug Hunt, Don't Turn Out the Lights, Nights of the Living Dead, and others. His comics include Black Panther, Doom War, Captain America, Pandemica, Highway to Hell, The Punisher, and Bad Blood. He is also a board member on the Horror Writers Association and the president of the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. So I'd very much like to welcome Jonathan Maberry.
Thanks for inviting me here. So I want to talk about short stories and how I got involved in them, because it's kind of an unusual process for how I got into that, and also the fun I've been having with it, because short stories are a hoot. I love the short story world. I was introduced to short stories actually by Ray Bradbury. There's a little bit of a fun backstory here. When I was a kid living in Philadelphia, the librarian for my middle school was the secretary for 2 clubs of professional writers. One that met in Philadelphia, and it was mostly adventure fantasy and some of the swords and sorcery genre. Elsbury DeCamp, Lynn Carter, folks like that. And the other club met in New York at the penthouse of a publishing president. And whichever writers were in town at the time were at these monthly parties. And this is 1970, 71. So back then, if you were launching a book, since there was no social media and publishing lived in New York, you launched it in New York and then did your tour. So Ray Bradbury, Richard Matheson, and a bunch of writers like that were there on a fairly regular basis. And somehow I became their pet project. Matheson and Bradbury in particular took me under their wing to talk to me about how to become a writer. I was 12, by the way, but I already decided I wanted to become a writer. So they schooled me on what short stories are. They schooled me on how to create an idea, and I'll get to that part in a second. But they also instilled in me a love of the form. And short stories are a very particular form. You know, I'm primarily a novelist these days. Before that, I was a magazine feature writer, a nonfiction book writer for many years. But I've only been in the fiction world for 14 years and started off, you know, as a novelist. I love novels. As Michelle mentioned, I also write comics. But short stories are a particular fascination of mine because two reasons. One, I didn't like them when I first started having to write them. The form, the length, I found somewhat claustrophobic for me because I write novels that are anywhere from 100 to 150,000 words. I mean, I write big books. And a short story, you know, you have about 5,000 to 7,000 words, and you know, I think in novel-length stories. So it was an intimidating form for me at first, and then I learned the form and fell in love with it. But one of the things that allowed me to learn it was a memory of something that happened on an evening in at one of these parties in New York. So you had Ray Bradbury and Richard Matheson, two kings of the genre. You had Lee Brackett, who is a novelist and screenwriter. She was there. We had Harlan Ellison, one of the great short story writers of our age. Evan Hunter, who was also known as Ed McBain, was there. So, I mean, it was an incredible lineup of people. And I'm this hairy 12-year-old. And I was asking about, you know, how do you take, you know, I'm sorry, let me rephrase this. They asked me if I had an idea for a story, and I said, yes, I had this, and they gave a quick thing, and they said, well, that's not an idea, or that's not a story, that's an idea, that's a concept. It's not an actual story. A story has an arc to it, has an end to it. It has, you know, more than just, this is cool, this is the story. So I said, well, how do I do that? And Bradbury says, okay, well, let's play the what if game. And this was something that apparently writers used to play a lot back then, and I've encouraged a lot of writers to do it since. They pointed to a window, and out on the ledge of the window were a bunch of pigeons. And Bradbury said, okay, so tell me about those pigeons. And I'm like, they're birds on a ledge? And I said, no, look at it and look at it from a writer's point of view. Tell me what's unique about that. And I looked and I saw that most of the pigeons were standing there looking out at the city, and one was looking in. And I said, well, one of them's looking in. And he said, now, why is he looking in? What is he seeing? And I'm like, people. And you know, I think it was Richard Matheson who whacked me upside the head a little bit. You know, it's like, no. Stop thinking like a normal human being and start thinking like a writer. Writers don't think like normal human beings. I'm like, okay. And ow, he had a ring that hurt. And I said, okay, well, you know, he's looking in here because he sees something important. And they're like, yeah. He sees, he wants something. And again, there's like, what does he want? And it was a whole series of questions. Every time I got to what I thought was the answer, it was a step along the way. And finally got to the point where you know, I had an idea for this pigeon had something against one of us and was waiting for that window to be open so we could attack. And, you know, I just went through this whole thing. It wasn't a great story, but it was a story. It actually had an ending to it. And they were all very happy with me. They told me that I had, at that point, they said, well, you may not be hopeless, which I took as a compliment. Granted, it was faint praise, but still, I'll take it. And over the years, you know, that I would go back there, for about 3 years that we were going back to these things while I was still in middle school. Every once in a while, they would bring books for me. And Bradbury had just finished writing the introduction to a collection of short stories called Impact 20. It was all William F. Nolan short stories, one of the great science fiction writers. For those who remember movies, he wrote the story that Logan's Run is based on, and also Damnation Alley and a few others. Really fantastic writer. But Bradbury gave me this short story collection. He said, this has a variety of science fiction short stories. And I said I'd never read a science fiction short story. He said, they're all really good. He said, but one is superb. It was called And Miles to Go Before I Sleep. And I read it reluctantly because I really wasn't interested in science fiction at the time. Kind of ironic now that I write science fiction, but I read that story and it was absolutely enchanting. I was sitting there, I think I was almost 13 when that happened. I was sitting on the bench waiting for the elevated train to come to take me to school. And I was sitting there and I was crying at the end of the story. It was beautiful in just a few words, in just a few scenes. With only a single character's point of view, he had constructed a complete character, a complete world, and it was filled with, the science of what he was telling in science fiction, but more importantly, the experience of the character. And I fell in love with that character's, experience. The story was about a guy who was a space traveler returning home, and he really needed to get home to see his family because he promised he would return for them, but he's dying and he's not going to make it to Earth. So he constructs an android that looks exactly like him, upon whom he can imprint his memories. So even though he will die, the android will take his place and return so that his family's not disappointed. Family, sees him living up to his promise. That story gave me chills then, and actually gives me chills now, remembering the emotional impact of it. From then on, I was a short story fan. I read, I don't know how many thousands upon thousands of short stories. And you mentioned Elmore Leonard earlier today. He was one of the masters of the form, as well as writers like, one of my favorites is James Lee Burke, who's written some brilliant short fiction. Joe R. Lansdale's written great fiction, Stephen King. And each writer brings a different view to short stories. They allow us to capture a moment. You're capturing lightning in a bottle, something very quick and very precious that you can filter through your own experiences, your own knowledge of craft and understanding of storytelling, but distill it down to something very potent and very beautiful. Not all short stories are uplifting, like And Miles to Go Before I Sleep. Not all short stories have a clean ending. The one thing about short stories is you don't have to follow one set of rules to tell a short story. There are a lot of different ways to do that. And that allows you to not only experiment with your own storytelling, but also experiment with form and with genre. When I first started doing short stories, it was on invitation. I had a couple of novels out. My first novel came out, Ghost Road Blues, came out in 2006. And when a novel comes out and has any measure of success, the writer is very often invited to contribute a short story to an anthology. It's kind of a thing that happens a lot. And I had no interest actually in writing a short story because much as I was a fan of the genre, I wasn't interested in writing that form because I just written a big meaty horror suspense novel and I wanted to stay kind of in that zone. But a friend of mine, Kim Paffenroth, who's a professor of theology, was editing an anthology of stories, of zombie stories set in different historical eras. And that's a weird sentence, by the way. Professor of theology, editing an anthology of zombie stories set in different historical eras. So it was just too much of a challenge for me to say no to, because it sounded like it would be fun. And I futzed around with ideas for a while, and I wanted to start this story. I had a great idea. I thought I developed it through, sat down to write it, and I realized as I was writing the story, it was going to be a novel. I had to scrap that one. Took another idea and developed it again to the third act, and that also looked like it was going to become a novel. So I had to find a way to write a shorter story. So instead of writing the longer chapters or longer scenes in short stories that I was used to in novels, I decided to write a bunch of little tiny micro scenes and string them together. So it's kind of like a mini novel with all these little tiny scenes. And I picked the Great Fire of Chicago as my historical setting and did a little research. And this is one of the things that spices up a short story. I did research thinking that, because I'd always believed that it was in fact Elsie the cow that kicked over the lantern and started the fire in Chicago. No, that's pure myth storytelling. most likely the scientists who I've researched, most of them agree that because of this huge drought that was going on at the time, and Bialy's comet was breaking up in the atmosphere, and particles were actually hitting, burning particles were actually hitting the ground, that started the fire, not the cow. The cow had nothing to do with it. And in fact, I think that was the first line of my book, is the cow had nothing to do with it. The first line of the short story. By looking at something, I knew I wanted to write a short story then. One of the things I did is I started looking at what happened, historically, what happened then. Because that allowed me to find a bit of information most people don't know. Most people do not know about Bialy's comet and the drought. They really do believe the cow is responsible, that darn cow. But it wasn't. It was something else, and something far more interesting. And of course, I took that and turned it into a zombie story because something came down from the comet and infected somebody. But I also made it a comedy because it was about two idiot moonshiners, gangsters in the late 19th century, and a comet bringing a pathogen. So none of those things were your typical historical short story, but it allowed me to have fun, and it allowed me to bring in elements to help me develop the tension moments that gave me an arc for the story and for the characters. That's, kind of my entry into short story writing. My second short story that I did was also one that involved a bit of research that allowed me to find a hook. There was an anthology called Legends of the Mountain State, which were all stories set in West Virginia. And the first volume had been very successful, and they asked me to write a short story for the second volume. And the challenge there was they wanted each short story to use as its basis a bit of folklore from West Virginia. And they asked me to write one about the Greenbrier ghost, which is the most well-known bit of folklore in West Virginia. So not only do I have to write a short story about it, I have to write a short story about something where almost everyone in West Virginia knows every detail about that. So where was the tension going to be? Where was the surprise going to be? So I started noodling around for things that happened, I think it was 1895, I forget the exact date, but around there. And just happened to find an oblique reference to the fact that in the chronology of Sherlock Holmes, he was, according to the Conan Doyle stories, in America at that time. I'm like, well, that's useful. So I decided to put Sherlock Holmes in that story, which gave me at least some fun, some interest, something they wouldn't expect. But the more I read about the Greenbrier ghost, the more I realized that there were a couple of entry points in to making that story that everyone's familiar with surprising. For example, in that particular case, and the Greenbrier ghost, by the way, is the only time in the history of American jurisprudence where the secondhand testimony of a ghost was entered into the court records and was used, it led to a conviction. That's actual history. The woman claimed that her murdered daughter was telling her that her husband had murdered her. And up to that point, everybody thought she had just died, falling down the stairs. It led to the exhumation of her body, and they found evidence that she had been murdered. And the guy was convicted. What they don't know is how the defense found out about this, because the prosecutor didn't want to put the mother on the stand because they figured the jury would think she was completely batty talking about her murdered daughter. But the defense found out about it and put her on the stand in an attempt to discredit her. But she was so compelling that the jury believed her. So I figured whoever, since they don't know who told the defense about that, the mother's experience, that was my doorway in. So Sherlock Holmes and Watson had been called in to try to investigate this. And after being frustrated by the fact that the prosecutors wouldn't even mention that she had this dream, he leaked it to her, leaked it to the defense rather, and they put her on the stand. So that became one of those little things that Sherlock Holmes does in a few stories where he kind of breaks the rules, like Blue Carbuncle, when he let the thief go and so on. He broke the rules a little bit. It allowed me an entry point into the story. So let's talk about what a short story actually is. I know some of you have already been published short stories. You have the short story, is it an anthology or magazine, whichever it is you guys do, but you're publishing works right now. But there are categories for it, and most people don't understand the categories. I want to start with that. And these category listings, by the way, are not upheld all through the publishing industry, but SIFWA, the Society of Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers, maintain that this is the industry standard. So we're going to just go with them for a moment. You have flash fiction, and it's usually anywhere from a few words up to, say, maybe 1,500. Then you have shorts, which are usually below 3,000 words, in that range. But a short story is up to about 7,500 words. Anything below 7,500 words falls into the category of short story. And that's a lot of latitude. You can tell a lot of story in 7,500 words. The next category up is the novelette, which goes from 75 and 1 up to 17,499. And a lot of us have actually written novelettes, but we call them short stories because that's more commonly used. But in terms of the structure of it, and then anything above 1750 to 39 is a novella. And then, of course, above 40,000 words is a novel. I've written, as of Friday of last week, I've written 120 short stories now. And they fall in all different ranges, and they fall in all different genres. I've fallen in love with the genre so much that I often take gigs based solely on my opportunity to write something that's outside of my comfort zone, because short stories allow for us to be experimental, deeply experimental. And a good example of this, I was asked by the editor, John Joseph Adams, he's a noted anthologist, to write a story for his anthology, Oz Reimagined, which was a series of stories set in the land of Oz, but with slightly different takes on them. And because I had been writing horror and thrillers, my immediate thought was, okay, I'm going to write a story where the Tin Man gets the heart of a serial killer and goes on a rampage with his axe. Because that would have been really fun to write. And I know some of my fans would have really, really loved that story. And I almost started to write it, and then I realized, yeah, but who are the Oz stories really for? And they're for kids. They're for little kids. I mean, kids who are reading their first books, chapter books or early readers. They don't want to hear a story about the Tin Man going crazy and hacking people up. It would have been self-indulgent and a disservice to them. So instead, I sat down to write a story. I reread the first three Oz novels because the anthology allowed us only to use elements from the first three novels because those were at the time public domain. More of them have since become public domain. And we couldn't use anything from the movies. Like, for example, in the books, Dorothy's slippers are silver, not red, not ruby. And the flying monkeys are not like just a mute slave race. They're actually an enslaved culture. They have a language that, they're not bad guys. They're forced into being the henchmen for the witch, but only because of her magic, not because of their desires. So I figured, okay, let me do something with that. So I wanted to write a story about a little winged monkey girl whose wings were too small for her to fly, so she couldn't go to all the places her friends were going. So she heard about a cobbler who was selling magic traveling shoes. She wanted to get those because they would take her everywhere. And even as I'm writing that, I'm like, what is this? Where is this coming from? I've never written for kids up to that point. It's been a long time since I was a kid. I haven't, I had just reread the Oz books, but I had kind of lost my connection to the simple magic of those stories. And it was completely outside my comfort zone, outside my genre zone. But man, it felt good to write it. And the story came out in the anthology called Cobbler of Oz, was the name of the story. It was picked up in a lot of the reviews, New York Times, Publishers Weekly, and other markets that reviewed it gave that story, a lot of attention. And then I got a letter, maybe 4 months in, from the estate of L. Frank Baum. And I'm thinking, oh crap, I'm going to get fried. I did something wrong, The letter said that they felt that story, Cobbler of Oz, was really spoke to the audience that the Oz books were meant for. They really loved it. And since it was set prior to the events of the book, The Wizard of Oz, they added it to the official chronology of Oz.
Wow.
And it is forever part of the chronology of Oz. I may have ugly cried when that happened. You know, I mean, I was so moved and so surprised because this was something that an editor had asked me to do, specifically picking me because he knew it would be outside my comfort zone. And I wound up writing something that I truly love. And I've just recently been asked by Clover Press, a publisher in San Diego here, to adapt it into a graphic novel. So I'm going to do that. And I might even go and write a full Oz novel at some point because I love the experience so much. But I would never have had any of those things happen, especially the inclusion in the chronology, had I not gone outside my comfort zone. This is an important thing because a lot of writers love their comfort zone. They think, well, this is what I do, and since it's what I do best, I'm not going to do anything else because that's where I shine. And I understand safety. You know, we all want to be in our comfort zone to a degree, but it doesn't speak well of our creative potential to say that we only do this. Our creative potential is unlimited. Ray Bradbury told me when I was a kid, a writer writes, and that's as far as you should define what kind of thing you write. Since I've been in the writing world, I started writing magazine features in college. Even though I went to college for newspaper writing, I started doing magazine features. I've sold 1,200 of those. I've sold 3,000 reviews, columns, and fillers, 27 nonfiction books over the years, including textbooks I wrote when I was teaching at Temple University, textbooks for my class, but also for other people's classes, because I had friends who were good teachers but not good writers. And I wrote, you know, I've written poems. I'm not saying good ones, but I've written them. I've written spectacularly bad song lyrics for a really, really bad heavy metal band. And thank God their album never sold many copies because they're good. I've written 2 plays, which were produced. I wrote greeting cards. When they did the Hallmark cards with the little Maxine, the little cranky old lady, I wrote the first 12 of those cards. Didn't create the character, but I got hired by Shoebox to write the text. And now I switched to fiction. Now I'm writing my 37th novel in 14 years. And 120 short stories and 20 some graphic novels and so on. A lot of what I write, and the reason I mention all this, is a lot of what I write is not in my comfort zone. I went to college thinking I was going to become a newspaper reporter because I graduated from high school a few years after Watergate. I wanted to be either Woodward or Bernstein. And by the way, that's weird because John Dean just started following me on Twitter today, and I still don't know why. That's really weird. But in any case, I wanted to be the investigative reporter who broke the big story. Went to college for that on a journalism scholarship, and never wrote for newspapers. I went right into feature writing because I took a class on it, and even though that wasn't what I had in mind, it sounded interesting, and I kind of had a little bit of, you know, the ADD of ooh, shiny, and I went in that direction because it looked like something I could try right away. You could write features when you're a college student. You can't write for big newspapers when you're a college student. So I wanted to get into publishing. Almost every step of my career has been something that I went to because it was interesting in the moment, and I remember being lectured about this. If you know who Richard Matheson is, not only a great short story writer, the Box is one of his most well-known, but also a novelist. I Am Legend, The Shrinking Man, What Dreams May Come, Somewhere in Time, Stir of Echoes. None of his novels fit on the same shelf. They were all different genres. So he always, preached that you should look for ways to expand, because if you ever get to the point where an opportunity comes your way and can you write this? Your answer should never be, no, I can't write it. You may choose not to write it, but you should never say, I can't write it, because that limits the possibility of growth. And I'll give you one actually really good example of that. I had done a novella, 20,000 word novella for an anthology called The New Dead. Again, another zombie story. I did a lot of zombie stuff. And the editor specifically asked that we write stories that were not in our comfort zone, not in our wheelhouse at all.
Mute this thing here, so, okay.
Is this a groomers?
Judy. Oh,
She's not muted right now.
you're not muted.
So it was a novella specifically outside our comfort zone. So what I did is at the time, I had never written a post-apocalyptic story, and I had never written a story with a teen protagonist. So I figured I'd do that. So I wrote a story about a kid and his older brother growing up 15 years after the zombie apocalypse, basically trying to find a job, and he becomes an apprentice to his brother who's a zombie hunter. And it was a, it was a very personal story. It's a bit of a tearjerker at the end, a lot of emotional beats in it. And the story came out, and again, got decent reviews in the anthology. And my agent, who usually doesn't read short fiction, most agents handle your longer stuff. She read it because of all the reviews and said, this is the opening of a YA novel. And I'm like, no, it's a short fiction thing. And she said, no, it's YA. And I said, yeah, but it was for adults. She said, yeah, but what you wrote is actually YA. She went up selling it, asking if she could shop it. She got an auction going and sold it to Simon & Schuster, and it became Rotten Ruin. Rotten Ruin is my most popular series worldwide. It's sold in 40-some countries, and there's a film in development right now. There's the 7th book in the series comes out in August, all because I had written a story, a shorter work that was outside my comfort zone. So some of my biggest successes have come from writing outside my comfort zone. I even did an article, not the current issue of Writer's Digest, but one just before that, I think it was the March issue, on, it's called The Genre of You, and it's all about writing outside your comfort zone, cross-genre, multiple genre, new genres, and so on. And short story work allows for that. A lot of the short stories I've done over the years, in fact, have been in worlds that are not my own. I've written short stories in the True Blood world, the Sookie Stackhouse world by Charlene Harris. I've written Wizard of Oz. I've written Hellboy and Aliens and X-Files and all those different genres because editors asked, and I thought, wow, that could be fun to stretch a little bit. There's a possibility that I might get invited to a romance anthology. If I do, I'm going to write the story because it's going to sound fun. I've never written a straight romance story before, and I figure, why not? Who says I can't? I don't know that I can't, so why shouldn't I give it a shot? And that's part of the magic that makes the short story world really work. Sometimes it's not the story that you think fits most squarely into the bullseye of your writing goals, but something outside that opens the real door, not only to sales, but to expanding your creative potential, expanding what you can do as a writer. Now, one of the things about short stories, and this is really important, there are, for those who have worked with any editors so far, you've probably read submission guidelines. If you haven't read submission guidelines, I would go look up submission guidelines short story, and there are plenty of examples out there. The guidelines are there so that you can write a story based on what their editorial needs are. Some are completely open call, and that's rare. But even then, if it's open call, it's going to be, it's a mystery story without it being like, say, a cozy mystery or a legal mystery. If it's just a mystery genre, you have a lot more latitude to write anything you want within that genre. But sometimes it's very specific. I'm currently the editor of the Rebirth of Weird Tales magazine, which is a magazine that was launched in the 1920s, and it launched the careers of some of the most important horror writers and dark fantasy writers of the 20th century. And everyone who's anyone has either written for Weird Tales or wanted to write for Weird Tales or has it on their bucket list. And I'm editing that right now. Now, recently we had an open call to fill one slot. We lost the story because the writer had to pull out, and we had an open call to fill that one slot. And we got 10,000 submissions in 1 week. 10,000 submissions. That I was hoping we'd get at least 100. You got to be careful what you wish for. And but we rejected over 8,000 of those submissions because it was clear that people had not read the submission guidelines. 8,000 out of 10,000. Our guidelines said we want stories between 5,000 and 7,500. I'm sorry, 5,000 to 8,000 was our range. They had to be dark fantasy, horror, or or dark science fiction, or something that follows that line. We said the stories had to be submitted as Word documents, not rich text format, not PDFs. We said the stories had to be in Times New Roman, 12-point font, double spaced, with no extra spaces between paragraphs unless you're indicating a story break. and and so on. And what we got were a lot of submissions that clearly reflected writers who saw that there was a guideline, saw an email address, sent a story in, paid no attention to the guidelines. Not only does that annoy an editor, it wastes my time as an editor and my assistants who are helping me go through the slush pile. It's also a bit insulting to the editor because they put the guidelines out there because it's what they need. And often an editor is editing something for a publisher. And so if, for example, this anthology, Don't Turn Out the Lights, which is a tribute to Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. It's coming out in hardcover in September. The publisher gave us a list of word length and other things that we needed to follow. So as the editor, I have to follow what the publisher wants for this in order to be able to turn in a manuscript of short stories the publisher will in fact publish. So you're pissing off the publisher and the editor and whoever's reading slush pile by sending in stuff that proves you haven't read the guidelines. It's also a disservice to you because you're sending in something that is absolutely going to get rejected. Why do that to yourself? Either don't submit to that. If the window's too narrow for you to write a new story, go find another market. And you can always find other markets. Raylan.com, for example, RALAN.com, is a free market listing, mostly mystery, science fiction, fantasy, and thrillers, but it has other markets as well. But you can search on different categories, like for the love of it, meaning you just want the byline, you don't care about payment, all the way up to pro rates, and a lot of iterations in between. That allows you to find markets that you can use to break into selling short stories, but it also is good training for you to work along with the guidelines published for each listing. Another one is Duotrope, DUOTROPE.com. And I think that's a pay version. I'm pretty sure there's a free version. It's a little less expansive than the pay version, but it has a lot of good listings. And the reason I mentioned Duotrope and Raylan is they're updated very often. And it allows you a pretty good set of listings for anthologies, for magazines, print magazines, for webzines, and so on. And including some markets you might not ordinarily think, like sometimes something like Cosmopolitan will take short fiction. Sometimes a hunting and fishing magazine will take a short story about hunting or fishing. So you might be surprised which markets exist for possible sales for short stories. They aren't just the ones you think about. Usually, if you were to sit down and make a list of where you think you might sell a story, that list would be a fragment of what the actual potential markets are. And you want to be able to find a market. You want to get your name in print. There's a benefit to selling to short stories in terms of your business sense as well. Because it's a shorter form, you get to write it, edit it, and send it out the door quickly, more quickly than a novel. And if it's bought, the editor will work with you. He or she will do edits. You'll get those back, and you work with that process of the editor's original edits. Maybe then a line editor comes in, maybe a proofreader comes in. Sometimes there's 3 levels of edits, and then it finally, goes out there. So what you see in a shorter period of time than if you were writing a novel, you see what your final polished, edited voice is in print. It shows you what your story becomes when it goes through the editorial process. Now, I know a lot of folks don't like yielding control to editors and so on. If that's the case, stick with self-publishing. I personally think everyone, including independent writers, should work with editors to make sure their work is as good as possible. Because if you don't, if you're just wanting to have something in print with your name on it, that's vanity press. That's not really publishing. Good independent publishing, just as good traditional publishing, has a process for you to refine that work so that when a reader pays for it and invests their time to read it, they're not being made fools of by getting something that is not the best work you could possibly have given them. And that's really important. The short story process allows you to go through that, hopefully many times. Each time you do, it refines your ability to work with editors to refine your story. It helps you refine your ability to yield some control in order to let someone else play their A game. I'm a good writer. I'm a moderately good command of the English language, but I would not teach a course on grammar for all the world because I'm a product of the Philadelphia school system. So, you know, that won't work. So I like the fact that editors find mistakes that I don't. Also, when we write something, we tend to read what we wrote, not what's on the page. Many, many times, something will go into an editor and come back with an inconsistency, an error or something. Word echoes, very common. I never saw when I was rereading it before I sent off because I'm reading what's in my mind, the version of it's in my mind, not what's on the page. I know there are tricks for being able to be better at that, reading it aloud and so on, but really another set of eyes is a completely different perspective. And it's particularly good when you're having somebody read it so that they can determine whether you've made logic errors. We all make logic errors every now and then. The complete story is in our head. The partial story is what we submit. We never, ever submit, I don't care how long our books are, we never submit a story that's as complete as what's in our head. So we tend to, because we know what that whole story is, we assume that it is complete enough on the page in our submission. And sometimes it's not. So sometimes that little reality check is very useful to us. I really recommend that you workshop your stories more than, say, workshopping your novels. I'm just going to have a little comment about critique groups. One of the things I dislike about most, not all critique groups, is that people are only reading a part of your work. And that really doesn't give you a good solid perspective on the entire work. With short stories, though, you can often read an entire short story in a critique group and get feedback on the entire thing. And that's so much more useful because they're seeing the beginning, middle, and end. They're seeing, you know, how you developed it. They're seeing the whole thing. That I find very useful. Critique groups that focus on short fiction tend to have a higher percentage of people who actually sell too, because the workshop dynamic allows them to put together, you know, to finalize a really good product so that whatever goes out is the cleanest it could possibly be. Oh, another little side tip. Based on the submissions I got for Weird Tales, spell the editor's name right. Telling you, I know my last name. Most people think they hear Maberry and they immediately assume it's M-A-Y, but it's not. It's the Scottish spelling. It's M-A-B. The E after the B makes the A long, as we have explained for centuries, probably. But if I see my name spelled wrong, I'm pretty unhappy with the story to begin with. I may not even read the story because if they can't get that right, there's going to be other things they're going to get wrong. I'm not going to waste my time reading that if they can't get a basic fact right. Yes, it maybe makes me a little persnickety, but everybody has their thing. I don't like that. I even had one where both my first and last name were spelled wrong. Okay, not only do I not want to publish this story, I may actually print it out just so I can tear it up. You know, I might throw a little hissy fit. Who knows? We'll see. Now, once you've sold a short story, you also have to deal with the short story contract. Unless you are a contract expert, don't sign it. Have somebody else look at it. I'm sure you either know someone or know somebody who knows a lawyer. Find a lawyer. Find someone who understands the basic contract. And also look up. You know, there's tons of information on the National Writers Union, for example, has information on contracts. There are a lot of different resources. You can look up short story contract, put in the word maybe analysis or breakdown or understanding or any of those words into a Google search, and you'll find articles, maybe message boards where they're talking about how to understand what a short story contract is. I made some mistakes, not with short stories, but with my nonfiction, my articles. A couple of the articles I gave away all rights. I was young, I was 19. But I gave away all rights, which means I lost the rights to those short stories forever. And they get reprinted every once in a while too. That really annoys me because they own it outright. Also, if you're doing something for certain types of anthologies, you have to make sure that it is a story that you will get rights back to in a timely fashion, and that's outlined in the contracts. For example, often there's a no-compete clause for anywhere from a year to 3 years, meaning you can't resell that story to another market in that time period. That is often negotiable. I never do 3 years. I'm usually down to about a year, where, if, from date of publication, I want to be able to resell that story in a year, because by the end of that year, the major sales for that anthology or magazine will have tapered off. There's no reason for them to hold it for beyond that. That's something you have to earn a bit, because as you're becoming a successful writer, you get to be able to play that card. Well, I'm not going to do the story for you if you don't, give me a shorter restriction time or other rights. But sometimes in the beginning, you have to do that just to get into print, but don't sell all rights. Never sell all rights. Because a lot of the money that you make on short stories is in reprint. That short story I did about the Moonshiners, Peg Leg and Patty Save the World, has been reprinted 29 times. I've sold it to markets all over the world, in fact. Not too long ago, I sold it to an Irish horror magazine. It's like, I didn't know there was an Irish horror magazine, but they reached out and asked if I had a short story, and I said I have a reprint, and they bought it. Also, you want to be able to keep those stories for short, single author collections. That's an important thing. So my first single author collection is this, Missing Past the Graveyard, collection of short stories. All but one of these were originally published elsewhere. And I think my first story, no, actually my first short story is not in my first collection. That's interesting. But all of these short stories were published somewhere else. I had a couple of them were not yet out of that restricted zone of being able to republish. So what I did is I wrote to the editor and said, look, can I republish this in a single author collection? They often will allow you to do that. They're a little less sanguine about you doing it for another anthology or for a magazine within those restricted months. But for a single author collection, they almost always allow you to do that, because in the credits will be originally published in, and it will actually advertise where it was originally published. So if they like that story, they may look for other stories that were in that anthology, even if they're by different writers. I know I do that myself. Sometimes when I read an author's collection, I go look to see where they were published. If I really think the story was great, I'm going to go read other anthologies, other stories in the anthology that was published in, because that's sometimes a great way to find short fiction. The single author collection thing is great. A couple notes about that. The bigger houses generally do not like to publish short story collections by novelists. They do occasionally. I mean, if you're Stephen King, yes, they're going to publish your short story collections. But very often they don't, because a short story collection will sell a lot fewer copies than a novel will. So for example, if you have a novel that sells, let me just pick a number, say 10,000 copies, your short story collection may only sell 2,500 copies. That's a significant difference. So most anthologies are published, or most short story collections rather, are published by medium to small houses. They give you less of an advance up front, but usually a bigger chunk of royalties. And they often will promote the heck out of it because they want to sell the copies. So I've done a few of those. In fact, my first 3 short story collections were all nice hardcover editions by Journalstone, a small press. Started off as an independent press, by the way. The guy wanted to publish his own book, so we started a press to do it. So it didn't have his name as the publisher. It was Journalstone Publishing. And then on the success of that, he started doing more books, and he started doing short story collections, and then anthologies. I love anthologies. I don't know how many of you have I'll put it on gallery view for a second. How many of you have published short stories in anthologies? Raise your hand. I mean, actually, physically raise your hand. Well, quite a few. That's cool. That's great. I love anthologies for a couple of reasons. One, in your early part of your career, the anthology is often anchored by a writer of note. So, for example, one of my early anthologies my story appeared in had a story by Stephen King. So obviously people bought it because of Stephen King's story. It didn't matter that King's story was a reprint. His name is a draw, and it will be on the cover, and people picked it up for that reason. I was also in an anthology with R.L. Stine, which was really great, because the guy writes Goosebumps. The guy sold more books than I think anybody in the world. He's sold a ton of those books. So of course people are going to grab the book because of his name. So don't feel bad that there are bigger names there. You're not going to get lost in the shuffle. Some people have told me that about anthologies. I'm afraid of being lost in the shuffle. No. You'll get read because of the names that are the big names on the cover. They'll read their stories and probably read some or all of the rest of the stories in the anthology, which means you'll get read by people who know good short stories because they've come there because of some of their favorite writers. That, if your story is good, it's now shining a light on you. They're saying, wow, that's really fantastic. Especially if some of the bigger names are contributing in reprint stories, because, you know, there's something about a reprint that, from a big writer, that makes you feel like it's just kind of like a token. It's not always the case, by the way, but it feels that way. So, but the original stories, they say, wow, these original stories are great. I've never seen them anywhere else before. Let me read them. And now they have a reading list of writers they want to follow. Well, anthologies, since they come in all shapes and sizes, from independently published anthologies all the way up to like the one I'm doing on Don't Turn Out the Lights, that's a HarperCollins anthology. But there are a lot of writers in there who are going to get a lot of recognition because they're in there with R.L. Stine and Barry Lyga, Cami Garcia, and just tons and tons of fantastic writers. Some of the people in there are first-time published authors, but they're in here because they submitted a compelling story. There are so many ways of getting into the market. Another way, you mentioned Audible earlier. Audible is doing a lot of original short stories. They're doing singles, they're doing short story collections, and they're doing original novellas. I was involved in the launch of this. They've been doing short stories for a while. And then Audible decided to try this thing where they would take a short story and publish it for free for a month. Anyone who subscribes to Audible can get it for free. In fact, if you're an Audible subscriber, if you go to Audible, usually each month there are about 5 or 6 free things you can get each month. So the first one of those was a short story they asked me to write. I did a short story called Lullabies, Ghost Story, read by Scott Brett, who's a top Audible reader. We got it was put up as my gift to anyone who likes a good spooky tale on Halloween. Even though it was not my idea to do it, that's how it was marketed. Audible really got behind and pushed it. That story was free for a month, and then it was for sale since then, $5.95. We've sold, after the free stuff, we sold so many copies of it, it became the #1 short story in Audible in 2018. Now, I still got paid for it up front, which, big fan of that. But the story attracted a lot of people to Audible, because I advertised it in my social media. They advertised it on Amazon and other places for people who aren't necessarily Audible subscribers to come in and join in. You get something free if you join. But they're doing a lot of that now. That proved the model. Now every month you get up to 6 free things on Audible because they proved the model. And I just finished a week ago Friday novella for Audible that will also be up free and for a period of time and then for sale. I've sold lots and lots of short story collections to Audible. Usually they're 5, this is back when they actually had CDs. They're usually 5 stories in a collection. It makes it quick. It's inexpensive for them to do. Because of digital technology, the audiobook readers are often reading at home. They don't have to go to a studio anymore, which reduces the overall cost. So Audible has exploded. I think it's a 8 or 10,000% market share boom since they went from having to sell CDs to digital downloads. And that, a lot of it is driven by short works too. And, it may sell for 99 cents or $1.25 or $1.99. But that's an income stream you don't have to do much for. You wrote the story and it's just out there generating income. Whether you sell it to them or whether you put it up, or record it yourself using ACX or one of the other models and get it up there, it's a way for you to reach a portion of the reading market who you might not ordinarily see, and you don't have to do as much of the advertising for it because it's driven by searches. If somebody's searching for a Western short story, they'll put that in and it'll pop up. It doesn't differentiate with, oh, this guy's a popular guy and this guy's a newbie. No, these are the short stories. You can scroll through, find what you like, which means you get discovered. And that sort of thing is really wonderful. It builds your brand. It makes you shine more visibly. And as I said, it constantly stretches you as a writer. I also want to talk very briefly about media tie-in fiction. Michelle mentioned in my bio that I'm the president of the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers. Media tie-in is when you write a story set in an established world. It could be a movie franchise, a popular TV series, a video game, or whatever. So I've written dozens of short stories for media tie-in, and we actually have categories of prizes for media tie-in short stories. Last year I won a Scribe Award for a Planet of the Apes short story. Somebody asked me if I'd write one. I'm like, sure, that sounds fun. I don't see it on anywhere on my bucket list, but it is now. Let me write that. It won an award, so yay. With short stories, I kind of liked playing in other people's worlds because the world is already set up. I can go in there as a fan. You guys have probably heard of fan fiction. So this is fan fiction with a paycheck, which is, so you get to write something like, I have friends who broke into professional writing by pitching short stories to CSI anthologies tied to the show, to Doctor Who, to almost any popular show you can think of. There's either novels or short stories out there. So you can look for those too. You can put in media tie-in, short story, and guidelines in a Google search, see what pops up, and tailor that search so that it's only bringing up results from the last year. You don't want to find, essentially a dead set of guidelines. You want to find more recent guidelines. Media tie-in also brings you onto the radar of editors. So some of the folks I know who broke into successful contemporary fiction and genre fiction did so by contributing short stories to anthologies that are media tie-in. A friend of mine wrote a short story, submitted a short story to a Buffy the Vampire Slayer anthology. Hers was the name least recognizable when the anthology came out. And then she got hired to write Buffy the Vampire Slayer novels. And then she went on to write another 75 novels in other genres, and now she's a bestseller. But that short story was her first published work. It actually opened the door for her because the editor who was editing the anthology was also the editor of the novel line based on that TV series. He liked her short story so much, he asked her to pitch a novel. She went up, she thought she was just going to be a short story writer. And she wound up selling her first novel because she took a chance on writing a short story based on the show she and her daughter loved to watch. There are a lot of doorways into this. Because of the rise of digital publishing, both independent and traditional digital publishing, there are a lot more open doors for short stories now. There are more anthologies, there are more web magazines, there are more magazines, like it might be a print magazine, but might have a web component that actually has more short stories. For example, with Weird Tales, we can only do about 10 short stories, 8 to 10 short stories per issue. But on our website, we're in the process of rebuilding the website. We're going to be publishing probably 20 to 30 stories a month on the website because that's a more affordable way to get the stories up. So, print is expensive. So that we'll actually be buying maybe anywhere from 25 to 35 stories per issue, but some of them are going to be on the web. That's cool. That's still published. It's still a paycheck, still a lot of visibility, and the buzz that the magazine gets will draw people to the website, and the contributors there will share in the buzz as well. It's a win-win. And because our first issue did so well, and one of our writers won a Bram Stoker Award for his story, we're now getting substantial interest in from both the film industry and from Netflix, who is possibly interested in doing a Weird Tales TV series because they like the short stories. And I don't know how many of you follow Netflix, but a lot of their shows are getting shorter. Like they have shows, this is, excuse me for cursing, but it's the actual title of the show. There's a show called End of the Fucking World. And they're 20-minute episodes. They're basically short stories. You have shows like Black Mirror, which are short stories. The new Twilights are short stories. A lot of them are based on short stories that were published in other areas, in magazines and so on. And that brings me to one more point before I open it up for questions. IPs. IP is an intellectual property. It is something that you have published, whether it's a book, a short story, a comic book, an essay, it could be, and by book, it could be novel or nonfiction. Because Hollywood is structured right now, and we're not talking about during the close down, things will change once the pandemic has slowed more. But since the end of the broadcast era and the rise of digital television, we have hundreds of stations with needing thousands of shows. Now, some of them are reality shows, yes. At first, they thought that cable was going to be mostly reality shows, and it turns out, no, people actually like stories. They want stories, whether based on real life events or fiction. And all of these stories, all these networks need scripted shows, and they need it based on something. The easiest transition is to take one of our stories, one of our writers' published story, and adapt it. Game of Thrones, True Blood, Dexter. God, it can go on. My own V-Wars started off as a collection of short stories, as a shared world anthology. It makes it easy for the producers to visualize what the thing might look like, because it's a fully formed thing, as opposed to pitching an idea to Hollywood. Pitching an idea to Hollywood is really tough. It's a very long uphill slog, very tough to do. Also, if you're a first-time writer, scripts are not what they really want to see most of the time. The thing right now is the published IP, the published work that you can pitch to. You can even get a book to film agent. It's a specific category based on your short stories. So you figure, one of my favorite short stories of all time, Justified, was in fact, one of my favorite TV series was a short story. The Raylan Gibbons character started off as a short story character and then became a TV series. And then Elmore Leonard went back and wrote the Raylan novel based on the TV show, which is kind of weird. It's kind of an inbred sort of model there. But it was a short story first. I have a TV series in development in Canada based on a short story. It doesn't really matter what the length is, as long as they think they can adapt it into a show. So not only does writing short fiction make you visible to further your career in fiction and print, it also can further your career in breaking into Hollywood. Because it used to be that nobody in Hollywood reads. In fact, that was a catchphrase. People, Hollywood doesn't read. Well, now they do. They have people who are going through published works looking for it. I get calls. I got one Thursday from a production company who's looking for IPs. They just wanted me to send my list of IPs to them. I never saw that coming, and I mean, prior to say maybe a year and a half ago, I never saw that coming. Now I've had about 8 producers ask me for that list of IPs. The world is changing. Short stories are starting to shine pretty brightly. They're fun. They can help you stretch. They can make you money. You can do them as self-publishing. Smashwords and other utilities allow you to self-publish short stories and make money. Amazon does that. Audible does that. There's a lot of utilities for publishing short fiction. There are micro anthologies, presses from small presses, micro presses, even groups, can publish their own works. Published is published. If you have a story that you think might be appealing to, say, Hollywood, it doesn't matter who published it. It matters that the story is compelling. The Martian was a self-published book, by the way. Now, I'm not a self-published writer, but I have a lot of respect for self-publishing that is done right, because it can open tremendous doors for those writers. And there are also hybrid writers who do self-publishing and traditional publishing. That's fantastic. A lot of my professional friends do that as well. They have projects that they think, they know that their agent can't sell, but they know that there's an audience for it anyway, so they self-publish, and they do well with it. So there's a lot to short stories. I absolutely love the idea of them. I want to go back and hit one more point, actually, before we go into the questions, is about the what-if game. It's a great exercise to play with your writer friends. Take anything. Doesn't matter what it is. I mean, for me, it was pigeons on a windowsill in New York. What could be more common than pigeons on a windowsill in New York, right? But you start looking at it and saying, well, what is different about it? Or one of my favorite things is what's the worst that could happen? Because I write thrillers and horror. So if I read a news article on, like for example, I went to a lecture on CRISPR, which is a gene editing technology that will eventually get rid of things like Tay-Sachs disease and sickle cell and a lot of other diseases. But the same technology, when I start thinking of what's the worst that can happen, it could actually allow for enforced eugenics and something like the Nazi master race program, but using cutting edge technology. That's scary. And I even asked the guys who were giving the lecture, I said, well, what prevents somebody from doing this? And I gave them some bad scenarios. And they're like, nothing prevents us from doing that. So maybe you should go write a cautionary tale, which I did. And you know, there's a lot you can do with any idea. Just think of what's the crisis moment, what's the drama, what's the worst that can happen, what's weird about it. Make yourself ask that and then go into this speculative area. And that's as true as in a romance as it is of a horror story. If you have an idea about, you know, two unlikely people falling in love, that's a concept. What makes them fall in love? Where does it go? What's the win at the end of the story, or the heartbreak at the end of the story? Think it all the way through by asking the questions that not only develop the story, but keep making it different than all the other stories that might be, say, in the same book. The more you ask questions, the more what ifs or what's the worst that could type of question, the more you'll get to that uniqueness that will make your short story so compelling that people will say, you know, I read this story, you know, I've read 1,000 romance stories, but I never read one like this. This is so great. That you want to be the anecdote they tell, because even within a genre or even within guidelines, your story shines with its own uniqueness, your personal writer's stamp. So now I'm going to kind of turn it over to questions, because I'd like to know what you guys, I'd like to talk about what you guys want to know. So let's get some hands raised, and Jim, if you can field the questions for me, it'd be great.
Okay. All right. I have Lynn. If I can unmute her there. Okay.
Lynn, what's your question?
Lynn, hold it. I'm trying to unmute you. There you go, Lynn.
There you go. Okay. So Jonathan, thank you so much. This was fabulous. I'm just so motivated. I want to run away and go write. But I love your questions about, you know, the things that lead you to take a concept and then turn it into a compelling story. But I had never heard about media tie-in short stories, and I am really intrigued by that. So again, if you could tell me, while you were talking, I was Googling, I'm sorry, but anyway, I was Googling media tie-in short stories guidelines. I thought that's what you said. It was like Google was stupid. Can you give me some more ideas about how to find people who might be interested in that?
Yeah, often just putting tie-in short story or story set in the world of, or something like that, and then the word guidelines. It'll usually pop something up. And you may just scroll a little bit before you find it. Another thing would be to go to, actually our organization, IAMTW, International Association of Media Tie-in, IAMTW.org. We have some, I think we still have some guidelines up on our webpage. A lot of genre groups, romance writers, mystery writers, and so on, will have market listings, and some of them will be tied to things like the mystery writers used to advertise, back when they were doing the CSI anthologies, advertised that they were available. The horror writers, we had advertisements for a lot of the different horror anthologies that we've done over the years, including some media tie-in stuff, like the Nights of the Living Dead one I did with George Romero.
Yeah.
We advertise that on social media. We advertise it other places. It takes some noodling around, but you can find it.
Okay.
One of the best ways is start with your favorite shows or movies that might still be active, and look for tie-in. Just write tie-in and short story, or tie-in novels, or tie-in whatever, and that title. For example, there was an anthology just recently put together of short stories set in the world of Supernatural, the TV show. So that showed up as guidelines at one point. It's no longer there. The anthology's done. But somebody found it by putting in a Supernatural, short story, and TV to separate Supernatural from, you know, just the word Supernatural. And they went up finding it. So,
Okay.
and also,
All right.
I found something that a while back where the group was doing a nonfiction book on the psychology of the show The Walking Dead, the philosophy of the show The Walking Dead. And I reached out to the editor and said, I'd love to write something for that. But it was something I found just by noodling around on the net, looking
Okay.
for Korean stuff. And I liked The Walking Dead, and I went up writing an essay for this Walking Dead nonfiction book. So
Cool.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. Dan, you're next.
Okay, is my sound working?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yay. It was one of my million settings. Okay, I wanted to know a little more too about the tie-ins, but more on the fan fiction side. I have an outline of a fan fiction novel that is would be a sequel to a science fiction movie called Forbidden Planet. You probably heard of it, John. But so how would I go about that safely without getting sued?
Well, if it's fan fiction, as long as you're not selling it, you can write whatever you want. Fan fiction is not for sale. If you're selling your fan fiction and the thing is under license, you are actually in copyright infringement. So don't do that. But writing fan fiction by itself without selling it, man, there's millions of pieces online. A lot of it's really great. Go do it. I love Forbidden Planet. Out of curiosity, would you stick with a Shakespearean theme in your sequel?
Well, it would be a parallel. It's what I'm thinking right now would be modeled after the Shangri-La, that
cool
concept.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be Shakespearean, but still classic.
Oh, cool, that's fantastic. Now, because that movie is relatively old, I think it was 50s, the license may be inactive. You can go, if you go to the best research for finding who owns the license would either be Wikipedia, they may have references to it, or if you subscribe to IMDb Pro. Now there's IMDb, which is free. IMDb Pro gives you all the behind the scenes, who owns what, who's managing whom, who's representing whom for everything. So if you look up that movie on IMDb Pro, you'll find out who's currently holding the license for it. Probably one of the bigger studios. Now the question would be, if you're trying to make money on it, would that studio be willing to invest in it or to allow a publisher to do something? If it's something that old, I'll bet a small press could probably get permission to do an anthology, for example, Forbidden Planet. Not sure you can get novel rights for it, but it's worth checking out. There was a really bad science fiction film, really bad, Plan 9 from Outer Space. One of the worst. They got permission from the estate of Ed Wood to do plans 1 through 8 as an anthology, and I wound up writing one of them. And it was a hoot, So I was writing a prequel to Plan 9 from Outer Space for a movie that is widely regarded as one of the worst films ever made. Turns out the company that owned the rights they just wanted acknowledgement. They didn't even want money, a percentage of the sales. So sometimes that can happen. And you have some things that are in public domain, like Dracula, Tarzan, the first 3 Oz books, first 3 John Carter of Mars books. They're all public domain. You can actually write a novel with those characters now. So it's probably a good idea to search and see what's in public domain as well. That's also a notable topic. Like you could write a sequel to Frankenstein. That might get you noticed. I mean, there have been, but not all of them are good. Write a new one. Sometimes people break into media tie-in by doing a piece of professional work for pay based on a license that has expired. So I would just search for that.
Okay, Dennis.
Yeah, but he can't unmute.
Okay.
I can unmute.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dennis. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask 2 things. Are you a plotter or a pantser? And also, what do your schedules look like in terms of all the different things you've got handled? Thank you so much, Jonathan, for a great presentation.
Thanks, Dennis. I'm a plotter, for sure. I am not a slave to plots, however. So what I usually do is I do a bullet-pointed outline for either novels or short stories without a lot of detail. I might write a general synopsis of the story for myself for reference so I can kind of work through the cause and effect logic of it. But then I have my bullet-pointed outline, and having the outline allows me to have a good mathematical formula of cause and effect to understand where the story goes. It also allows me to write non-sequentially. So for example, if I'm writing something, I might want to jump ahead and write an action scene, or maybe if there's if it has multiple characters and multiple storylines, I might just write one storyline and write the other storyline and weave them together. There's a lot of different reasons to write non-sequentially. But I like plotting. Also, with short stories, I write the ending. I write the first line of the ending, and then I go back and aim at the ending. So I have my bullet point outline for a short story might be like 5 points, 5 story beats I want to hit. But I always write the ending first because I want to be able to get there without wasting time going in directions that don't serve that ending. It's allowed me to write a short story much faster than I used to. Now, as far as my schedule, there's 2 ways to answer the schedule. I'll do them both real quick. One, I'm a full-time working writer. I write 8 hours a day, and that's 8 hours at my desk. Now, some of that is also business. Like yesterday, I was on phone conferences with an actor and a producer about something. So that that was a 2-hour Zoom call. Well, that's 2 hours of writing I didn't get done. So I had to adjust my anticipated word count goal for that day to allow for business things. But I do write every day, and weekends a little less. But my schedule for all the different projects, I am in that category of what's called a high output writer. I have multiple projects going on. I'm writing 3 full novels this year. I've already written 1. I'm halfway through a second. I've got a 3rd that I have to deliver in December. I'm writing 4 novellas of 30,000 words plus. I'm writing a graphic novel for DC Comics, 1 for Clover Press, and several short stories, all this year. So I had to calendar where each one falls. So like my first novel took me 3.5 years to write. My last novel took me 3 months to write. So actually a little less than 3 months. So I budget about 3 months, 3.5 months to write a novel. But within that, I budget out like, all right, I need 2 days to write a short story. So I'll slot that in here. I need to write 4 issues of a comic book. So they need to be budgeted out throughout the year. I also need to budget out my social media time. I do 10 minutes of social media every hour. And I use my Echo dot thing to tell me at the end of 50 minutes, the alarm goes off, I do 10 minutes of social media, and then go back to writing. I'm a very disciplined writer. I follow structure because structure allows me to be more efficient. And the more efficient I am, the more successful I become. But also, it allows me to have more time to do fun other projects. And I'm all over the place in terms of what I write. My first book this year was a standalone horror suspense about somebody who steals tattoos and the memories associated with them. The current one I'm writing is a international thriller, action thriller. And the next one I'm doing is epic fantasy. So 3 different genres. I need to do research for all those. So I also have to budget in time to do research. So it's a busy day, but having a structure for it allows me to get it done without the anxiety that comes from not knowing what to do next. Well, I know what to do next. I'm going to work on this. I'm going to work on that. Maybe my next thing is revisions. I just got revision notes from something. I budgeted in the amount of time. I glanced through how extensive the notes were, and I budgeted how much time I'm going to need to go through and do those notes. And the trick really is to pay attention to your process. Whatever you do well and comfortably speaks to a good part of the process. Whatever is preventing you from getting work done in a timely fashion, there's something in that you're doing that could be changed, that could be improved. And you also have to allow time for leisure too, but structure really helps. And I know a lot of folks are pantsers. I think you're all evil and alien, and I don't understand you at all. I know that some of my friends, like Steve King, swears that he's a pantser, but he's not. He has a pack of 3x5 cards in his pocket. Each card is notes on each chapter. I hate to tell you, Steve, but that's a plot. You just plotted your book. But he insists not. Same like James Lee Burke. James Lee Burke insists he's not a plotter. But I know he is. I actually have seen his outline. They're written on not cocktail, but the diner napkins, pieces of paper, and he has them all paper clipped together. It's still a plot. So plot is good. It's not evil. One last thing about plot before I move on to the next question. Just because you have plotted something out, though, doesn't mean you need to stick with it. Because stories are organic. They grow in the telling. Characters become alive as you write them. So you have to allow your plot to be changed by the story that's actually coming through you.
Okay, Kathleen Osborne. Kathleen?
That was an accident. I didn't mean to raise my hand. He's answered every question I've had.
Okay, all right.
Michelle.
Michelle, let me unmute you there.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, great. So I have always been afraid of short stories, of attempting to write short stories. I did start my first one because actually, Jonathan, it's your fault. You told me last fall to don't go on to my second book in my series, put it aside and write some short stories. You told me to write 3 this year. I'm trying to get to that number. I am partway through the first one. So there you go. But as part of my research, as part of getting up to speed on the form, since I've never really been much of a short story reader or writer, I picked up your bits and pieces. So you have been my tutor. And within that, what I'm finding is I'm reading your stories. Yeah, it's a really, honestly, I think you need to read at least the first book or 2 of his Rotten Ruin in order to really get anything out of bits and pieces personally. I mean, I imagine you could go to it cold, but I'd recommend at least reading the first or second book of Rotten Ruin. But what I found in there interesting is how many different ways you tell your short stories in that collection. So one in particular, I actually read this one yesterday, Fences. I don't know if you know which one. You've written so many short stories, you know them by your titles. That is the one where Benny is at the fence and the guard comes by. What I found interesting about that, and I went back and reread it a second time because it felt very immediate, and yet you told the story third person, but not from the viewpoint of either of the 2 characters in the scene. And yet you felt like you were there. So how do you make those choices when you're deciding your point of view? How do you approach that?
That's a great question. Sometimes I noodle around a little bit. Now, just side note about that particular story. This is a good example of salvage, because that was a story cut from the second book in the series. It was a scene that I removed because for length, because the book got long, but I liked the emotional dynamic of that scene. So when I was doing Bits and Pieces, which is a collection of short stories that is actually book 5 of the Rotten Ruin series, I decided to flesh it out more and give it a little more of an arc. But as far as voice goes, sometimes I'll have a character whose voice is just already speaking to me. And as I'm building the plot knowing that voice, and sometimes I have a story idea, and I don't know the voice, and I may have to open the story a couple of times from different characters' perspectives until I find the one that feels right. A lot of it is gut. Sometimes I want to go deep into the character's experience. In my my Joe Ledger short stories, my Monk Addison short stories, which have just been, the short story collection has just been options for TV. The character's experience is the story. The plot is much less important than the character's viewpoint about what's happening. So that has to be his viewpoint. But in some of my other short stories, it's the deep point of view may not be the protagonist. It may be somebody else, because I want them to be able to understand the protagonist and see them introduce the protagonist. It's especially important, like when I was doing the story for Charlene Harris's Sookie Stackhouse True Blood anthology, I wanted to use the character Mustafa, and he's a gay bouncer werewolf. So not in my comfort zone in terms of who I am. I'm a straight white guy who's not a werewolf, as far as you know. And but I wanted his point of view, but also wanted another character to kind of see him so that we get a different take on him. Because we are often unreliable narrators of our own experiences. We tend to make ourselves a little more heroic or a little more tragic or a little more whatever. But if another character is seeing us, then we get their take on it, filtered through their experiences and so on. So I noodle around a little bit. It's very, very few short stories, unless it's dedicated to a specific ongoing character. Very few of my short stories start with me knowing exactly which character point of view I want, unless it's a single character short story. Like I did one called Being Emily Claire, about a little girl who enlists the monsters under her bed to help her fight an interdimensional demon in her school locker. All right, had to be the kid's point of view, because that's the only characters in the story are The monsters under the bed, her, and this elder god. So only one of those perspectives is actually going to work for the story. But I did a Hellboy short story where I was alternating points of view a couple of times within the story. And of course, the Sherlock Holmes story, Watson is the point of view character in all the stories. So I noodle around. Sometimes the version of it that I tell, like the original Cobbler of Oz story, was all going to be told by a companion of hers. And then I realized I didn't want the companion in there. And I had written a third of the short story from the companion's point of view. And it was a friend, another winged monkey, but who could fly, who was trying to help her friend find these shoes. And I realized it made the story cumbersome, and it took the charm out of that character's unique experience. So I shifted back, rewrote it from a little, the one with the stunted wings point of view, and that became the story. So there isn't one answer. I noodle around until I find the one that makes me say, yeah, that's the voice I want to tell the story in, because it's the voice I would want to read the story. Good question.
I have one quick one, and then I'll get to Judy. My question is, you're obviously very prolific. How much time do you spend rewriting, editing?
Well, that changes all the time, because when I did my first novel, and I 3.5 years to write, 18 revisions. So a lot of time rewriting. My first couple of short stories, I rewrote, a number of times, because I didn't know what a finished short story would be that came from me. I've read them, but we all as writers are hypercritical of what we do, so I can always see things I want to improve. And then I realized, actually I went up talking to another writer friend, and he quoted to me a line that was originally said about poetry, but has been applied to other art forms as well. The original line was, "A poem is never completed, merely abandoned." And I thought, wow, that's really great. So I got to the point where I stopped nitpicking and just said, all right, sending it in. If he doesn't like it, he'll tell me, the editor. And I got it back. There were a couple notes, in fact, because, and I did the notes. But I'm glad I didn't keep rewriting, because I think I would have written the life out of it if I had kept going. So I did a few. Now, these days, I have a trick I use, and it's something that if you're published already, it helps. And if you're not yet published, this is something to work toward. This is something I couldn't do when I first started. If I'm writing a new short story, I'll either listen to an audio version of one of my previous short stories to get myself into the zone of what my short story voice sounds like. Or sometimes I will just simply take the most recent short story I've had edited, that's gone all the way through the editing process, and I'll read it aloud to myself. Because that allows me to then become so familiar with my final edited, published voice that I can start closer to that voice. And I'll have fewer levels of revision necessary, because now I'm writing for the version of me that is used to being published. And with most of my work now, I do a draft, a pass, and I send it in. But that's where I got to. It's not where I started. You earn that by paying attention to your process, paying attention to edit notes, and rereading your published work so that you really remember what that voice is like. Because we tend to remember the version we submit. We often don't remember the version that was edited. So reread the edited version, because that's you at your best, and you can aspire to that voice and write more quickly and more confidently in that voice over time.
Okay, we've got time for about one more question. Judy, you have a question? Mute. Well, she must have muted herself. Okay.
Cindy had a question over there, but.
Okay, well, how about?
How's that?
Yeah, you're there. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah,
sorry about that. I don't know if it means, when it says unmute, does that mean I'm unmuted or I'm not?
You're okay. You're all right now. You're all right.
Anyway, so thank you for all the information. I'm pumped, ready to try to attempt short stories, because I felt the same way. It feels constricting to me. But anyway, but you mentioned that you work 8 hours a day, and I spend a lot of time at my computer. So this is more of a physical thing since I'm having back surgery. Do you do anything? Do you take you have Echo remind you of social media? Do you do regular exercises and break up that writing of 8 hours?
I do. I usually, I get up every, once in a while, not, sometimes it's a couple times an hour. I get up and just walk around my office a little bit, stretch a little bit, sit back down. I have a dog, so I have to walk the dog a lot. And during lunch, I usually walk a couple of miles, anywhere from 2 to 5 miles, come back and take a shower, and I'm ready to dive back in again. So physical activity really matters to me. I was a martial arts instructor full-time before I became a full-time writer. So not only did I gain weight, I also got out of shape. So over the last couple of years, I've been going in the other direction, losing the weight, getting back in shape by reminding myself that this is still a physical process, sitting at a table, at a desk writing. And you have to honor that. You have to make sure the body is healthy and so on. And since I've been doing regular exercises and little Tai Chi and some yoga,
It makes a difference.
It really does make a difference. My energy level is better. I fatigue less. I get fewer headaches. And also I feel good because I'm, it's beautiful out. I'm out walking I live in the San Diego area, right on the edge of Del Mar. So there's a lot of nice forested hills for me to walk in, or walk, where the beach is open, go walk on the beach. But anything that gets you out of your chair and moving again helps. And then you can go back and do another burst of writing. So good question. Yes, do that.
Okay, we've really run out of time. I want to thank Jonathan. It was a terrific, excellent. We really appreciate you sharing this time with us. Been very instructive. One thing, by the way, I was writing fiction. Kind of a little personal story here. I was writing fiction and not doing anything with it. It wasn't going well. I'd had some nonfiction books published. I said, okay, I'm giving up. That's it. I'm finished. The very day I said that, I got a letter and a short story I'd written won a $500 contest, and since then I've had a little bit of success writing some fiction. So that short story turned around my writing life. So, but thanks again. It's been wonderful, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed.
Back on the screen.
I hope this everybody has enjoyed this as much as I have. And we will see you in a month. And I hope you join us again sometime, Jonathan. It was wonderful.
It was my pleasure. My pleasure.
Goodbye, everybody. See you in a month. Bye-bye.